Hello, hello, hello. Just making sure we are actually live. Thank you for being here. Okay, it looks like we are live. Thank you so much for being here. I'll give another 30 seconds or so for people to come in, to join us, to join the conversation. If you're here with me, drop me a hi so it's not that lonely for me here. Let me know where you're dialing in from. I have landed in Spain. I have relocated this week, so I'm going to be spending the winter here, but I'll share more about that on another occasion. But yeah, so it has been a whole week of stuff, of moving stuff. Shankar, hi. Lovely to see you here. Thank you for being here. Drop me a hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you for being here. As you know, the conversation on burnout is an important one to me, is one close to my heart. And as I mentioned last week, so this conversation is, in a way similar as last week's, in a way that yeah, it's kind of unplanned, on the spot, relatively spontaneous. Last week I just kind of like went live. At least this week I gave myself and you 24-hour notice. So last week I went live to talk about burnout, and more specifically to debunk some of the toxic narratives that I have been hearing flying around from people who call themselves quote unquote burnout experts. And so, yeah, many of those messages didn't resonate with me. And not only they didn't resonate with me as someone who has been through burnout, but also I found on taken on face value, they actually could be harmful. So I felt it was important for me to go live and just debunk some of those things and why they didn't resonate with me. But also, following that live, I was overwhelmed with messages from people who not necessarily wanted to comment publicly, but they sent me direct messages, and we're talking about how seen that conversation, that spontaneous conversation, made them feel. And many of them shared their experiences with burnout. Many of them shared that they are witnessing other people going through burnout, be their colleagues, be their friends, be their family in most instances, and just sharing of how tough it is. And we had a few conversations with some of these people, and there were a number of questions that kept on popping up. And the question around, how to show up for someone, how to be present for someone who is going through burnout was one of the most common questions. And so I thought, instead of just sharing some of my tips in these closed spaces, just because of the sheer number of people who are asking for that, I thought, again, it's worth coming live here and sharing it with everyone. And hopefully there's again going to be someone who not necessarily wants to make themselves public, who these messages will resonate with. So just hello to everyone who has joined us. The comment section, the chat section is live and will be monitored. I will be also monitoring it after the live event, so feel free to drop in me a hello. Feel free to ask in any questions. Feel free to share in any of your own reflections and thoughts on this topic as I go through some of these tips, and let me know whether they resonate in any way, whether you agree with them in any way or not, and just share any of yours. So just to recap a little bit on, why I decided to talk about burnout, apart from the fact that, it's a very personal experience and is a topic that hits close to home. What I have noticed over the past few weeks is that more and more people are talking about burnout, anxiety, depression, mild depression. And they're talking about it in live spaces, so webinar settings, conferences, and so on. But also more and more people I've noticed, people in my network, my friends, my colleagues, and also people who I don't know are sharing more of these messages on social media, be it in stories, be it in posts, in tweets, commenting, liking, whatever it might be. And it just kind of, showed me that there is an increasing interest and resonance with these topics at this very moment. It could be the fact that, in the northern hemisphere, we are going into the dark months of the year, so basically in the winter, and that naturally creates this kind of space where we want to go inwards, and sometimes that scares us, just because many of us have had very active summers. We've been going places, we've been doing things, and not necessarily we respect and honor the natural cycles, and the natural need for us to go inwards and replenish our energy, and to process, and to recharge our batteries. So that is probably one of the reasons why we are kind of like experiencing a greater need to talk about these things, and why these topics perhaps resonate a little bit more. Also, over the last week, as I mentioned in my live last week, is I was involved in 3 completely independent conversations and meetings across different platforms, where quote unquote burnout experts were sharing frankly unsolicited advice about burnout. And it was very surface level, very shallow advice in many cases, and as I mentioned earlier, I felt that if taken on face value, this advice could create more harm than good. And on top of that, since the live, as I mentioned, I've had many individual conversations and people sharing their very personal stories, and just the sheer interest and conversations happening behind closed doors again confirms that. And I really, at this point, would want to say thank you to people who did gather the courage to write whole essays to me about their very personal experiences, or currently witnessing someone going through that. And I really want to, that doesn't go unnoticed, and I do appreciate that it takes courage to open up about that. And the third thing, as I mentioned also last week, is the mental illness crisis that we have been in for a long time, and we are still in, and if anything, is just ramping up. And one of the indicators of that is that, again, the suicide rates are higher than ever, and especially within the vulnerable communities, such as LGBTQ and children, which is very, very concerning and dangerous for us as a society. So those are kind of like my key reasons for, why am I here in the first place, and why am I so openly talking about burnout, anxiety, mild depression, and those kinds of things. Like I said, they are topics close to my heart. They hit home very closely, but I also appreciate that not necessarily we have spaces where we can openly talk about it. And so before, and when we talk about burnout, another thing I want to talk about is the fact that when we talk about burnout, we often focus, or in most cases, rather, we focus on the person in question and how to fix them, which was one of the toxic narratives I talked about in my last week's live, this fixing mentality. But ultimately, so the onus is on the person experiencing burnout. The onus is on fixing that person, rather than realizing and accepting that burnout is a social issue. And another thing that we often don't talk about is the other side of this burnout experience. I'm going to use that term, burnout experience. So the other side of this burnout experience is that people who have to be around a person battling burnout, anxiety, or showing first signs of depression, we don't talk about those people. And the thing is, none of these, depression, anxiety, burnout, are quick fixes. Burnout alone takes minimum, I would say, of a couple of years to get through, if treated and addressed. If ignored, it can take years. And if ignored, it can turn into chronic depression and other, illnesses ultimately that need a professional and strategic treatment and medical attention. And I'm not here today or any other day to advise on medical treatment on any of these illnesses. But what I want to do is to stress that there is another side and another story of burnout experience that is not talked about enough. And that is the family, the friends, the colleagues who have to find and learn new ways of navigating their everydays to honor someone's battle with mental illness. And that's tough. And that's tough, especially when we do not have a choice of distancing or disconnecting ourselves from someone going through burnout or anxiety. Because being in such environment, no doubt it does leave residue on us. And not only it leaves residue on us, but it actually can lead the person supporting someone going through burnout, lead that person to going into burnout themselves or experiencing anxiety. So I hope that this kind of like helps you start seeing of what I mean by how complex and layered the issue of mental illness is. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just an individual, but a societal issue. So what I wanted to do today in this short LinkedIn Live is to offer 5 ways in which you can show up for someone going through burnout in a way that also protects your energy and sanity. But before I go into that, just one more thing that I wanted to mention is that there have been a number of questions that are coming through. This has been kind of the one that kept popping up most of the times. So instead of creating a LinkedIn Live that goes through each of these questions, which I'm sure would be useful to many, what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to come back to this place, hopefully same time, same place, with a mental well-being professional, an actually trained and educated mental well-being professional here with me next week for an AMA or Ask Me Anything session, where I will be bringing those questions that I have received in my DMs to this space to unpack them together with my colleague anonymously. So don't worry to anyone who sent me any questions. They will be unpacked and talked about anonymously. So you don't need to worry about of being recognized in any of them. So if you have something you'd like to ask around the topics of burnout, anxiety, early depression signs, please drop those questions here in the comments. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, send them to me directly, or simply show up to the session next week and ask them live there. And so watch for the link to that session to come. And so the 5 ways in which you can show up for someone going through burnout, as I mentioned, in a way, hopefully, and most importantly, rather, that protects your energy and sanity. So the first thing that I want to talk about is acceptance. And this might seem like a weird thing, but what I mean by that is accepting that the person who's going through burnout will not have the same amount of energy as before. Accepted that they will have varying energy levels, they will have varying mood states. So all we can do, especially with someone who we have to live in the same environment with, and like I mentioned, who we can't necessarily distance ourselves from, is to accept that and not judge, and don't tell them off about it, and don't call them lazy. Our frustration towards their changing moods and desires and attitudes won't make their condition any better or their journey through it any easier. So it is for us as bystanders or witnesses, as much as it's for the person going through it, through burnout, is to accept what is happening to them and to accept that it will be a tough journey for everyone ultimately to navigate it. And the sooner we accept it, the sooner we'll be able to surrender to the process and recovery rather than and kind of like focus on the problem rather than fight with each other just because the person is not showing up in the way how we're used to them showing up. So the first things first, ultimately, it is accepting that that the person is navigating something very, very tough. It will be tough on us as well. But the most important thing that we can be is to be present for them. And that kind of brings me to the second point around the presence and also refraining from unsolicited advice, which is very hard for us to do, I know. And so number two is being present and being present in their journey and in their pain. But when I say being present, I want to make a different, there is a differentiator between being present and taking on someone's hurt and pain. And I want to say that they're not the same thing. Being present for someone does not equate taking on someone's hurt or someone's pain, as much as we would want to do that because it's someone who we love. We don't want to see them hurt. We don't want to see them being pain, and we want to just take that away. But as I mentioned in my last week's live as well, is that is actually doing disservice to them, because this change, this process they're going through, is also their process of growth. And we are actually doing disservice to them and ourselves by not honoring that process and simply being present with it. And so I would say, as part of this, it's also, part of being present is also asking the person, what is that they need from us in that moment? Because we are very quick by solution and saying, oh, you need to get out of bed, you need to go out, you need to go for a walk, you need to get dressed, whatever it might be. But actually, instead, what we should be doing is asking the person, what is that they need right now? What is that they need from us in that moment? And if they will want us to come and solve the problem for them or solutionize with them about how to do something, they'll let you know and they'll ask for your advice. But I would just say refrain from going straight to the advice when it's not being asked. Because again, when your body is in a literal survival mode, you can't take on anyone's advice ultimately. And in most cases, people going through burnout already know that they need to go for a walk. They know that they need to get better. They know all of those things. That's already, kind of their advice to themselves. But we just need to be present for them in that moment. And even if you have been through burnout yourself, then sharing your experience might help, as that might make the person feel less lonely and less isolated during this time. So you can absolutely talk about what helped you, what helped you get through the journey. But I would say, don't go straight into advising and assuming that what helped you will help them, and what you did is exactly what they should be doing. That will just minimize their experience. So don't minimize their experience. Their experience is unique to them, even though we use this umbrella term burnout for everyone. Each of our experiences is different and unique. So don't minimize their experience or act like you know exactly what they're going through. And that kind of brings me to the third point of, if you haven't been through burnout and not necessarily can relate to what the person is going through, connect. And what I mean by connect is, while you might not be able to connect to the journey and to the pain and the isolation that the person is experiencing, what you can connect is the human emotion or the human feeling that the person might be feeling. And they might be feeling emptiness, despair, low self-esteem, lack of worthiness, grief in some instances. And while we can't connect with exactly what they're going through, we can definitely connect with that human emotion or what that person is experiencing and feeling. So just show compassion and empathy for that feeling or what that person might be feeling at that very moment. So I'm talking a lot about, being present, connecting, and kind of, showing up for the person in that way. However, I do appreciate and know that it's not always easy, and not that it's not always easy, but actually that can be done at the detriment of our own health. And so another huge thing to do and very important thing to do is setting boundaries. And setting boundaries in a way that, communicate when you need to check out yourself too. Maybe you have a keyword when, enough is enough. And this is not only useful in navigating a burnout journey with someone actually going through burnout, but actually this is very useful in arguments with your partner. Just for instance, when me and my partner go into any arguments, and we kind of see ourselves going down the rabbit hole, we have a keyword where we say, "I'm out." And after either of us say that keyword, we know we need to shut up and let that person just process something. And actually, it's been quite pleasant to notice that we use less and less of that word, and we actually get in less and less of those kinds of like rabbit hole fights where you can't see wood for the trees. But it's just an example of how a keyword means that I'm triggered right now. I need a time to process, or I can't take in or on what you're communicating to me right now. And this should work both ways. So when someone going through burnout might get overwhelmed by someone's unsolicited advice or whatever, it might be useful for them to have a keyword and say, please back off for a moment. Let me process. Let me just be for a moment. And also for the other person, when, like I said, when you're going through burnout, your moods shift, your energy levels change, and absolutely we can get laggier and just mean without even intending to hurt someone. So even for the person who's holding space for someone, it is good to have, a mutually understood keyword that will allow that person to check out and just decompress if they feel that they're going down the rabbit hole. And we can do that, and we do that, especially with the people that we love. Because again, we want to help them, and we want to kind of pull them out of their misery, which unfortunately sounds easier than it's done. But so the keyword is just one example, because arguments and even unsolicited advice sends our nervous system into high alertness, and this is the space that ultimately, in prolonged stress, prolonged high alertness is what sends people in burnout. So again, in home environment, we need to make sure that there is as little high alertness moments of triggers as possible. So when I earlier, in kind of tip number one, I said, the acceptance, it's important to accept. I also want to clarify that it is important to accept that their condition and the fact the journey won't be easy, and it will take time, energy, and resources to get through. So it is about accepting someone's mood swings, but not necessarily accepting someone being rude or abusive. It is about accepting that you will be part of that journey, but it's not about accepting that the onus will now be on you to pull someone out of the dark place. So, the boundaries is about being present with the person, but making sure that we do not harm ourselves in the process. And there is no shame in tapping out or, being present for ourselves while we feel the urge to be present for someone else. We do have to keep, so to say, our cup full first and foremost. So setting boundaries is a huge one. And again, in the moments when things do get too much, again, it's very, very important to find ways of replenishing our energy and just processing the kind of home environment or whatever we might be finding ourselves in. So it's important to know yourself and find what replenishes your energy. Because living under the same roof with someone going through burnout or depression, it's tough. It is really, really tough. And at times, you might be feeling guilty of experiencing joy while someone is going through, deep grief and just misery. But you should never be feeling guilty about that. And it is important for you to find ways of how you replenish your energy and what can you do in those moments and when you can tap out. Be it as simple as, going for a walk, or whatever that might look like and mean to you. So just to recap, like I said, this is going to be another one of those short LinkedIn lives, but I just wanted to share some tips and some of the things that I have been talking about behind closed doors, because I thought that they might come handy for some people who might be going through burnout or might be witnessing someone going through burnout and feel that it is their job to go and pull that person out of that space. Again, easier said than done, and we actually do not hold the power to do that. It is for that person to do that themselves, but it really does help when there is someone who allows them, who accepts them as they are with their condition that they are in at that very moment, and allows them to navigate that space. And so first and foremost, once again, it is to accept that. It is to being present with the person, but then refraining from sharing unsolicited and unwanted advice, even if you know exactly what the person is going through. And if you don't, the number 3 is to connect. If you can't connect with the experience, connect with the human feeling. It's important to set boundaries and to make sure that you do not hurt yourself in the process. It's okay to accept someone not having the same level of energy or having mood swings, but it's not acceptable if someone is being rude or abusive towards you in the process. So there have to be boundaries in the place, and also find and create ways to replenish your energy. And again, this is true not only when you navigate burnout or live under the same roof or work with someone who's going through burnout, but this is true in any instance, that we need to find ways and create space and ways for us to process things, emotions, and replenish our energy. Remember that you can't heal if you do not feel. I think that kind of like goes hand in hand with replenishing your energy. So I hope this has been useful. As mentioned, I'll be back here next week with someone with mental well-being background, someone professionally trained in this space, and we will be addressing and unpacking some of the other questions that have come through around burnout, where families are concerned about how they are showing up, what can they do, best ways of kind of navigating those spaces. So there are a number of questions which I'm going to be bringing to this space next week. So please join us. Drop your questions either in this in the chat here on this live. If you don't feel comfortable doing it in a public space, drop them to me in DMs, in my messages, and we will bring those to the next week's live. And of course, show up to the live as well if you have any questions there and then. We'll be happy to pick them up. And yeah, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take good care. Thank you for being here.